Gojo was evil and Sukuna was good. It sounds crazy, right? In the actual manga, Gojo was the one who kept everything in check as the strongest, while Sukuna only ever cared about his own pleasure and displeasure. He abandoned his humanity to the point that he literally became the king of curses. But what happens if you flip their narrative roles? Today, we are doing the ultimate role reversal scenario in Jujutsu Kaisen. And just to keep things organized, there are 5 key points you need to remember as we go through this scenario. First, we're looking at power scaling. How strong are evil Gojo and good Sukuna compared to their canon selves? Would anything even change at all? Spoiler alert, yes, you bet it would. Second, how does this change their backstories? If you flip their alignment, Sukuna and Gojo's pasts won't be the same, right? And will Yuji still be born? Third, we're zooming out to look at Jujutsu society as a whole. What do the higher-ups and the big 3 families look like under an evil Gojo? And on the flip side, how does everyone treat Yuji when he's the vessel for a good Sukuna? Fourth, how does this change the major arcs of the story? Specifically, we have to look at the Shibuya incident, the Culling Games, and the Shinjuku Showdown. These are the 3 most important events of the series, and all 3 involve Kenjaku's plans. But how will he go about those plans now that Sukuna is good, but Gojo is evil? And finally, the one I'm sure you're all waiting for, the climactic battle between good Sukuna and evil Gojo. Does Sukuna have a chance even without Mahoraga? Will the good guys have to run a gauntlet against Gojo? Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. And with all that said, let's get into it. We're starting with the first point, the power scaling. If Gojo is evil, does that actually make him stronger? And on the flip side, if Sukuna is good, does that make him weaker? I'd argue yes to the first point and no to the second. But let's actually break down why. You see, our canon Gojo always had lines he wouldn't cross. This is exactly why Kenjaku chose October 31st as the date and Shibuya Station as the location for his trap. He wanted to leverage the crowd gathered for Halloween to restrict Gojo's movements because he knew for a fact that Gojo cares about civilian lives. Of course, Gojo still pulled off a generational performance, especially when he killed Hanami with just his infinity and then used that legendary 0.2-second domain expansion. But imagine if he didn't care about civilian life at all. Imagine if he was more like Suka, who didn't spare a single thought for the civilians that got massacred when he unleashed Malevolent Shrine on Mahoraga. In that scenario, all Gojo would have needed to do was use Unlimited Void immediately. He would have taken care of every single disaster-level curse, including Mahito, in an instant. And Kenjaku would never have had the opportunity to surprise him the way he did. So, considering this, if canon Gojo is 100%, I'm putting evil Gojo at 110%. That extra 10% is purely a psychological boost, but it makes a lot of difference. For example, if you do cross-verse power scaling, like, let's say, Gojo versus Makima, you'll see people say that Gojo would forfeit because he would not want to kill everyone in Japan. Well, our evil version of Gojo would not care even if he had to kill everyone in Japan. If he wanted to, he would defeat Makima. Anyway, let's look at good Sukuna next. Sukuna's power has always been about pure, unrestricted violence, and his open barrier Malevolent Shrine is the perfect example of that. Now, of course, we are not going to change his entire curse technique, but we do have to tweak things a bit. Because, come on, we can't have a good Sukuna unleashing something called a Malevolent Shrine. So, how about we switch it to Benevolent Shrine? It still functions the same way, but instead of relentlessly targeting everything with Cleave and Dismantle, Benevolent Shrine would only target based on cursed energy fluctuations. This would actually make his domain more focused and ruthless. Not to mention, it would potentially increase its radius as well. Because you see, Malevolent Shrine's output is spread across every single thing in its radius, which means a portion of that cursed energy is wasted on objects that don't actually need to be cut. Benevolent Shrine, by filtering targets based on cursed energy fluctuations, only expends energy on actual threats. That means the same total cursed energy output can now cover a larger area, because it's not being diluted on non-targets. So, here's the final tally for point 1. While evil Gojo is 10% stronger thanks to that psychological edge, good Sukuna remains roughly as strong as his canon self. We're going to keep him right at 100% of canon Sukuna. Alright, now that we know how strong they are, for our second point, let's talk about their backstories and how things got to this point. We're starting this section with Sukuna. We know that while he was still in his mother's womb, Sukuna ate his twin. He did it because his mother was starving, and there were not enough nutrients. Of course, this led to him being born with 4 arms, 4 eyes, and 2 mouths. The people of this time treated him as a wretch because of his appearance. And as we learned during his final conversation with Mahito, being treated like that is what made Sukuna want revenge against them all. However, while that kind of backstory makes it seem like Sukuna was destined to be a villain in every reality, let's not forget that during that same conversation with Mahito, he straight up said that if he's to be reincarnated, he'd like to live differently in his second life. So what if this change in Sukuna actually happened 1,000 years ago? Imagine if, in his childhood, he met someone like Yuji, Yuji, and that changed his moral compass. In fact, you can even say that just like how Gojo had Geto, Sukuna had his own Geto who saved him from a life of revenge and selfishness. From here on out, Sukuna would go on to become an honored one, but more like a wandering sage than the king of curses we know, a vagabond if you will. He'll eventually reach old age, and that's when Uraume would make that deal with Kenjaku to reincarnate Sukuna into the future. His reputation as the strongest sorcerer of the Golden Age would still remain, but instead of the king of curses, he'd be known as the Sage of Sorcery, or simply put, the Jujutsu Sage. Next, what about Gojo? How does his backstory change? You see, a big part of the reason why Gojo did not become an evil nepo baby like Naoya is because Geto was there to serve as his moral compass. So how about this? How about we make it so Geto was born 5 years after Gojo? This means they won't be in the same school year, and they'll never become friends. Now, Geto's absence alone won't turn Gojo evil. At first, he'd just be more of a selfish jerk. He'd still be friends with Shoko and have Nanami and Haibara as juniors, but he won't have that one and only best friend. The turning point happens at age 16. He still gets the mission to escort Riko Amanai, the Star Plasma Vessel, and he still gets defeated by Toji. He recovers thanks to suddenly learning reverse curse technique, and then kills Toji. But because there's no Geto there to keep him in check after his second round with Toji, he actually goes through with killing the non-sorcerer religious followers of the Star Vessel Association. It's an unhinged massacre comparable to what Sukuna did in Shibuya, but the consequences would be minimal. He'll return to his life as a student. After all, it's not like the Jujutsu Society can actually punish the strongest. He's simply asked why he did it, and he responds that he felt like it. That's all. And from this point forward, Gojo starts seeing non-sorcerers the same way Sukuna saw humans. We're talking absolute contempt. He started seeing them as inferior, weak creatures comparable to insects or livestock. And while he doesn't necessarily decide to kill every non-sorcerer like Geto did, he completely stops caring about collateral damage while doing his job as a sorcerer. Okay, now before we move on to our third point, let's answer a big question about Yuji. Will he still be born in this narrative? Yes, he'll still be born as Sukuna's vessel. So with that said, it's time to move on to the third point. How exactly does Gojo becoming evil change the Jujutsu Society? Unlike Geto, who was quickly labeled a curse user after what he did to the village, the Jujutsu Society would naturally be more lenient with Gojo. He is the strongest, and he's also the head of the Gojo clan, so they can't really afford to turn him into an enemy. They would essentially be walking on eggshells just to stay on his good side. As for Gojo himself, he'll make it clear that the higher-ups of the Jujutsu Society and the big three families, including his own, need to know their place. He'll also shift the Jujutsu Society's priority from maintaining stability to creating as many Jujutsu sorcerers as possible. Basically, although Gojo would be fully capable of killing every non-sorcerer in Japan, he'll find that way too boring and straightforward. Plus, it just wouldn't satisfy him. This is the key point. While he'd have a permanent hate boner for non-sorcerers, he'd still possess that innate desire to see other sorcerers potentially stand on equal footing with him. This would be similar to how, regardless of how evil Sukuna was, he was still always a Jujutsu nerd. However, while Gojo wanting to create more sorcerers would actually lead to more potential Jujutsu sorcerers being found, it'll also lead to a rise in curse users, as they quickly understand that as long as they don't cross Gojo himself, they can get away with a lot. As you can expect, other sorcerers like Nanami, Kusakabe, and especially Yuki would try to keep things in check, but overall, Gojo would be the one at the top, influencing the general attitude of all Jujutsu users. The entire moral compass of the sorcerers would start to shift toward might makes right. Then comes the day he finds Yuta and has him enroll in Jujutsu High. There won't be anyone trying to sentence Yuta to death in this version of the Jujutsu Society, because at this point, the number of higher-ups who can talk back to Gojo would be exactly 0. Fast forward to a year later, when Yuji eats the finger and becomes Sukuna's vessel, Gojo would personally have him enrolled as a student at Jujutsu High. He'd do it because in his mind, if Sukuna can regain his pride, he'll finally get to fight and beat the strongest sorcerer in history. Now, I know what you're thinking. What about Megumi? Would Gojo still be his caretaker? Well, the answer here is no. In this scenario, Gojo would kill Toji too quickly for him to ever learn about Megumi's existence. Because of that, the Zenin clan will be the ones to take Megumi, and they'd sponsor his stepsister Sumiki's living expenses and education. They'd send her to a private academy, and believe it or not, the Zenin would actually treat Megumi well. After all, now that the entire Jujutsu Society has become Gojo's monopoly, Megumi, as the user of the 10 Shadows, is the only one with the potential to eventually counter Gojo and make the Zenin clan relevant again. Now, you may have another question here. Would Yuji, Yuta, Megumi, and everyone else also be influenced by Gojo's attitude? The answer is no. While Gojo would be the man behind Yuta and Yuji getting enrolled, he won't actually be a teacher at Jujutsu High. That role would instead belong to Suguru Geto, who'll be around 24 years old by the time Yuji enrolls. He'll be the sensei to these kids. And as you can expect, He'll be a good guy as far as this scenario goes. Now, speaking of good and bad, while we've already established that Yuji would be enrolled because of Gojo, how do you think the Jujutsu Society would treat him? After all, while he beat Sukuna's vessel, Sukuna is supposed to be the Jujutsu sage in this lore. The answer is that most people wouldn't even know. If you go and binge read Naruto, you'd be surprised at how few people actually made the connection that he was the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki. Something similar will happen to Yuji here. Because Sukuna won't be the king of curses, his fingers won't be in the spotlight as special grade cursed objects. They would mostly remain unknown to the majority of the Jujutsu Society. And for those who do know, Yuji will be treated less as a vessel and more as someone who has the same incredible potential as the Jujutsu sage himself. As for Sukuna, he'll eventually come to terms with the fact that he is reincarnated and will start teaching Yuji how to use cursed energy and everything else, while he generally avoid taking over Yuji's body. If Yuji is ever in true trouble and unable to handle things, Sukuna will switch with him and help him out. Alright, with those 3 points down, we've set everything up. Now for the 4th point, we're going to see how the main story plays out. What do you think? How will the Shibuya incident, the Culling Games, and the Shinjuku Showdown go down? The answer to this lies entirely with Kenjaku. He'll be observing Gojo from the shadows, and one day, while he's still using Kaori Itadori's body, he'll approach Gojo with a deal that Gojo won't be able to ignore. While Kenjaku's ultimate goal would still be the merger, he tells Gojo that there's a way to turn every single person in the world into a sorcerer. Just like that, he'll have Gojo's full attention. You see, this version of Gojo has been wondering if there's a better option than just killing all non-sorcerers in Japan. He even asked Yuki if there was a better way, but Yuki's research was still incomplete. And to begin with, her goal is to help humanity break away from cursed energy entirely. So why would she ever help Gojo? So when Kenjaku comes up with his plan and explains the concept of the Culling Games, Gojo decides to go along with it. Next, around the time of the Kyoto Goodwill event is taking place, Gojo demands that the higher-ups negotiate with the Japanese government to rebuild society with sorcerers at the top and non-sorcerers as second-class citizens. He is essentially staging a subtle coup d'etat. Fast forward to the Shibuya station on October 31st. Chogo, Hanami, Dagon, Mahito, and also Chozo start causing chaos and wreaking havoc. Because Gojo is busy elsewhere, Tokyo High and Kyoto High head to the scene to handle the situation. Yuta is with them, and Geto is acting as their sensei, which gives them a decent shot at defeating even the disaster-level curses, especially considering the option that Sukuna will be able to help from within Yuji. However, things go horribly wrong. Kenjaku sneaks up on Geto, who had already used up most of his cursed spirits to counter the disaster curses, and kills him using the anti-gravity system technique via curse technique reversal. He then immediately takes over Geto's body, which leads to the students absolutely crashing out because Geto was their sensei and they liked him. And while this is unfolding, the existence of Jujutsu sorcerers suddenly becomes public to the entire world. To understand why, we have to look at what Gojo was doing just before the Shibuya incident. While the negotiations with the Japanese government were still underway, he showed up as if he were now in charge of Japan's Special Defense Forces, even though they're all non-sorcerers who have never even heard of him. But you see, he knows that they've never heard of him. He's just acting out because the government is taking too long with the negotiations. That's why, to show how far he's willing to go to permanently change society, Gojo eliminates the American military base in the Kanto Plain region. This happens just 1 hour before the Shibuya incident, and by the time Kenjaku takes Geto's body, the news reaches the entire world. The war escalates within days as no conventional weapon works on Gojo, and so eventually a UN Security Council resolution passes that allows the use of nuclear weapons to take out Gojo's Satoru. But Gojo casually destroys the nuclear blast with a hollow purple right as it was about to go off. This leads to so many Black Swan events around the globe, and both Tokyo High and Kyoto High realize that they have to stop Gojo before this escalates into World War III. Plus, naturally, as you'd expect, after seeing Gojo launch an attack that could stop a nuke, the American military surrenders and leaves Japan. A few days later, Japanese society is completely restructured with sorcerers as first-class citizens. Moving on, we've got the next major arc, the Culling Games. First, let's go back to the Shibuya incident. During the Shibuya incident of this scenario, Yuji killed Jogo and Yuta took out Hanami, while Dagon and Mahito were stalled by Geto, with everyone else doing their best to help. As for Chozo, he realized that Yuji is his brother and switched sides. Now, Mahito was still alive by the time Kenjaku took over Geto's body, but then Kenjaku absorbs him and initiates the Culling Games by using Mahito's idol transfiguration via maximum Uzumaki to remotely alter the brains of marked individuals. And unlike the manga, Kenjaku runs the Culling Games with Gojo's explicit permission, and Gojo immediately makes it clear to the Jujutsu Society that he has no intention of stopping the games. As you could also expect, when the students realize that Gojo, the man they were already wary of, is actually now on the same side as the person who killed their sensei, sensei. They finally understand that Gojo has truly become their enemy. Meanwhile, Uraume, who is also back by now, finds Yuji and fills Sukuna in on the deal they made with Kenjaku. Since Uraume is loyal to Sukuna, they join Yuji and the others. Because wherever you find Sukuna, you're gonna find Uraume. As for Megumi's sister, she never gets marked by Kenjaku, so she never falls into a coma, which means Megumi is far less depressed this time. He's like young Gojo, which is the exact type of personality you need to keep clowns like Naoya in check. By the way, remember how in the actual manga, Kenjaku invited American and other foreign troops into the Culling Games to use their deaths as fuel for the merger? Well, he doesn't need to do it here, because most of the deaths from Gojo's fight with the military happen after Kenjaku starts the Culling Games. Plus, there are far more curse users in this scenario than in the original narrative, as many of them flock to Tokyo to join the games. Many of the fights here are also the same as the actual manga, but there are also plenty of new battles involving sorcerers who weren't even in the original story. To add to this, while the motive in the canon was about freeing Gojo and saving Megumi's sister, the main goal this time is stopping Kenjaku and Gojo themselves. Naturally, this means that many players are going to agree with Gojo's thinking, but thankfully, Yuji, Yuta, Megumi, Todo, Nobara, Maki, Itomaki, Panda, and the rest of the cast, including Hakari, who they also managed to convince, as well as other characters like Uraume. Of course, Yuki and Chozo as well, who are guarding Tengen. They can handle pretty much everyone. We even got a Yuji versus Kashimo fight while Yuji is at 15 fingers. It gets incredibly close once Kashimo uses Mythical Beast Amber, but Yuji manages to win thanks to Sukuna. Meanwhile, Kenjaku versus Yuki's fight plays out the same as it did in the manga. Kenjaku wins and successfully absorbs Tengen. This means everything he needs for his merger is now set up. Now, you must be wondering, if Kenjaku's plan is the merger and Gojo's plan is to make everyone a sorcerer, is Gojo being fooled? Well, the answer is a hard no. Gojo being evil does not mean that he's dumb. He knows exactly what's up, so he forced Kenjaku into a bonding vow that prevents any lies or betrayals. This was Gojo's condition for playing along, and Kenjaku complied because he doesn't need to trigger the merger right away. He's fine waiting a few centuries for that. For now, he's happy to achieve Gojo's goal of turning every human into a sorcerer, because when everyone is a sorcerer, he may be able to plan something even better than the merger he had in mind. For now, Gojo and Kenjaku's plan is using the energy from the Culling Games to expand Tengen's barriers to the entire world in order to trigger cursed energy awareness in all humans. Alright, so as the games reach their climax, Gojo personally enters the chat to congratulate the survivors, but he makes it clear that they are still nowhere near his level. Yo, I know. But because he doesn't want to kill them for defying him, because he wants strong sorcerers in this new world, he proposes a showdown in Shinjuku for the entire world to see. He chooses December 24th as the eve when all non-sorcerers will be forced to become sorcerers. And he tells the gang that he'll fight and defeat whoever they bring against him. To make things interesting, he even gives Yuji the final 5 fingers he hadn't eaten yet. This leads to the gang spending the next few weeks prepping for the fight. And during this time, Sukuna personally trains everyone and tells them how they can use their techniques efficiently. He's a surprisingly calm and patient teacher, so much so that Yuji teases him about it, which causes Sukuna to crash out like a tsundere. Alright, and now it's time for our final point. Evil Gojo versus good Sukuna. How exactly do you think this is gonna go? Sukuna doesn't have the 10 shadows, which means he can't use Maharaga, but wouldn't he still be able to use Incarnation to regain his original Heian body, and then use Domain Amplification to counter Unlimited Void? After all, an extra pair of arms and an extra mouth in the Jujutsu world is arguably as useful as the 6 eyes, if not even more. And while that's true, I'd argue that in this scenario, he won't actually use Incarnation. You see, unlike Megumi, Yuji was literally engineered by Kenjaku to be a cage. His body was designed to suppress Sukuna, not accommodate him. Plus, for Sukuna to transform into his true Heian-era form, he needs to overwrite the vessel's soul and remodel the host's body. In Megumi, this was simple because he had already broken Megumi's soul. But in Yuji, even if Yuji consents, the cage nature of his body may prevent a full transformation. It may still be possible, but Sukuna does not want to break Yuji's soul. Even if he has to fight at a disadvantage, he'd rather not hurt Yuji's soul. But how big of a disadvantage are we talking about here? If true form good Sukuna is 100% of his canon strength, this version is likely only around 75 to 80% as strong. Meanwhile, evil Gojo is at 110% of his canon strength. The fight itself would be similar to the canon version, with multiple intense domain clashes. But eventually, Sukuna gets hit with Unlimited Void, and with no Maharaga to bail him out. Maharaga! Gojo technically defeats him. However, let me point out that Yuji survives. Basically, when they were cornered by Unlimited Void, Sukuna uses his soul to bear the full burden of Unlimited Void, which exhausts him to the point that he can't fight anymore, but leaves Yuji unharmed. Meanwhile, following Takaba's fight with Kenjaku, Yuta takes care of Kenjaku exactly like he did in the original manga. Back at the main fight, Higuruma and Megumi enter the chat to join the gauntlet, so Gojo tries to neutralize them with Unlimited Void, but as it turns out, he can't use it anymore. Although he won the final domain clash against Sukuna, his brain has experienced enough cumulative damage that his domain expansion is burnt out. To make matters worse, he gets his limitless technique confiscated by Higuruma's deadly sentencing. This happens because Judge Man finds him guilty of playing around with World War III. Naturally, he also gets the death penalty, but that's not a problem because he easily knocks out Higuruma with a single cursed energy reinforced punch. Even without Unlimited Void, even without the limitless technique, Gojo is still the strongest sorcerer thanks to his cursed energy optimization and the 6 eyes. Of course, losing Limitless means he loses the Infinity Barrier, which makes him finally touchable. But even when Yuta enters the chat and uses authentic mutual love, Gojo handles him just fine. Even Hakari's domain is not a problem. And if you think I'm glazing him too hard, let me just remind you that during Shibuya, Gojo was destroying Hanami and Jogo with nothing but martial arts and basic cursed energy control. Still though, every man has a limit. Eventually, as other sorcerers like Maki, Todo, Nobara, and even Araume join the gauntlet, all the damage and restrictions would catch up on Gojo. And in the end, as Yuji lands multiple black flashes and soul dismantles, and Megumi brings out merged beast Akito, thanks to the specialized training he did with Sukuna, they are finally able to take Gojo down. In his final moments, Gojo uses his last words to compliment Yuji and Megumi for fighting so hard, and then he closes his eyes for the final time. Now, in the wake of Gojo's defeat, the world would need time to recover, especially with Japan in ruins. But as Yuji continues to host Sukuna, he steps up as the new strongest to keep everything in check. He destroys the new order that turned non-sorcerers into second-class citizens and rebuilds Jujutsu Society alongside his Jujutsu friends. Thanks for watching this video. Make sure you like and subscribe, and click on this video next for more great anime content. Go on, check it out.